All right, what is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode here on the Lure Lab. I believe this is now episode 31, and we have a good one for you today. We have Stefan coming on, and we're going to be talking about a new technique that has come over probably, I don't know, within the last 3 to 6 months. You've probably heard a lot more about it, and that is the hover rig or hover strolling. And today we are going to be joined by Stefan. And he has put out a bunch of YouTube content already around this new technique and how to rig it. And we couldn't be any more excited than to get him on here. So let's get Matt on and really dive into this new technique. What's up, man? How you doing?
Hey Andrew, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I was actually sitting on YouTube when I messaged you watching like one of your rigging videos, and I was like, I got to get Matt on here to talk about this because between you and Milliken, like I feel like that's all I've been watching for the last 2 weeks, and I'm like, you know what? Then I saw the jig head from Core Tackle. I think I have that right, Core Tackle, and I was like, okay, definitely have to message Matt now. So we'll dive right in. Like hover strolling, hover rig. What is the hover rig?
Yeah, so it's a hover strolling is a technique that it's been around for several years actually, but really didn't start getting popular in the US until I'll say last spring maybe. It's really starting to get more popular now, but it has been around a little bit over the past year. And it's a technique that I saw, which entails taking a 90-degree jig hook, unmolded jig hook, and putting it into your worm about a quarter inch to a half inch behind the head, and then inserting a nail weight into the front of your plastic bait. So you get a really cool gliding, spiraling motion on the fall. Generally, you're talking about weights that are the same size as your standard nail weights. So a 3/64th, maybe a 32nd, something along those lines. So it's a very finesse approach. But because of the positioning of the jig hook as well as your nail weight, you get an erratic fall, which generates a lot of good uh, a good erratic motion that generates a lot of reaction strikes out of the fish. And when I first saw it, I was like, I got to try that because to me, I'm always looking for finessey approaches. I live up in Wisconsin where we've got a lot of natural lakes, a lot of gin clear water. And when I saw the motion of it in the presentation, I thought this would work really well in my area. So I took it out one day on a local lake, and I just remember being amazed by how the bait fell and more importantly, how good the fish were reacting to it. So I ended up catching a pile of fish, but at the end of the day, the one thing that I didn't like about it is every time I caught a fish, I I either lost the nail weight or I lost a plastic bait because there's nothing really holding it onto the hook well. So as good as it was at catching fish, I also went through like 3 bags of Berkeley Max Scent flatworms and like 3 packs of tungsten nail weights, and I was like, "Well, that was an expensive trip." It was a lot of fun, but an expensive trip. And that kinda led me down the path of coming up with a hover rig jig head that has now led to the creation of Core Tackle. But what I ultimately did was I took a 90-degree jig hook and positioned the weight on it to be similar to how you would position the nail weight in the worm. And after a few prototypes, we were able to achieve the exact fall that you'd get by using the 90-degree jig hook with the nail weight, and therefore was able to save myself quite a bit of money in terms of how many nail weights and how many baits that I ended up going through. So it's a technique that definitely requires a little bit of patience because it is lightweight, but uh, very much worth that weight on the fall because it generates a lot of additional strikes.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, and all the baits that you can even rig it with. And we're going to get into that here in a second. But when you're rigging the hover rig, right? Like you have the new core tackle hover rig jig head that you created, and then you have the traditional. Can you dive into like the proper hook sizes and if people like for whatever reason, don't want to buy your jig head, right? Like, can you
Yeah.
walk through the hooks and the best hooks maybe that you found with the nail weight in there so people can
Yeah.
lose a bunch of plastic and nail weights?
Y Yeah, so, the setups from a bait standpoint is almost limitless, and what I mean by that is the baits you can make a hover strolling rig out of a 7/0 hook if you'd like, and a big nail weight and put it into a, you know, a giant fluke or some big plastic bait. So I mean, it doesn't have to be simply a small, uh, little 4 1/4 inch Berkeley flatworm. It can be bigger plastics that you just need to adjust your equipment to. The standard equipment and what is out if you were to go buy some of the hover strolling hooks that are actually made for it now. Because up until I'm going to say about 6 months ago, there were no specific hooks. Like it was pretty much you took an unmolded 90-degree hook, the same ones you'd use
Like
for a
that.
do it mold. Yeah, exactly. Just a 90-degree hook. And that's actually what I was taking to make my first prototypes. I was using some owner, I can't think of the number.
5318, the real thin wire.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, it
Yep.
was the
Oh,
same ones I was using to make, like, football jigs, light football jigs for hula grubs, and, so I was taking that and using that for some of the prototypes, but so there were no specific hooks. Now there are some specific 90-degree jig hooks for hover strolling. Ryugi makes one that's really good, and they've got little keepers that are uh, hand tied onto the hook, and that's just to try to secure your bait on better. Because if you think about putting a plastic bait just on a 90-degree jig hook, there's nothing really there to hold it in place, right? There's
right.
no good barb or anything like that. It's just the bait slides up and down the hook shank pretty easily. So the keeper that they've got on theirs is definitely good. Uh, I just still wasn't satisfied with the amount of baits I was going through as well as the number of nail weights. And that's where we came up with ours. The standard size hooks for the most part are small. I mean, this was a very, very finessey presentation that came out of Japan. A lot of the hook sizes you're talking about are size twos, size ones. I mean, we're not even getting into the yachts, right? I mean, we're talking small, what a lot of people would consider crappie
Yeah.
size hooks, and which work great with a lot of the tiny baits that presentation was kind of formed around. But I wanted a little bigger hook, so I started making them with a size 1/0, a size 3/0. We've got several other sizes in the works to kind of satisfy all of the different baits that you're going to be able to use with this technique.
It's gonna be fun. Like, I saw the picture on the core tackle of like the max scent creature hog, I believe it was in there, and
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, if you could put like a 3 in there and like probably like a 3/16 ounce head nail weight if
yeah,
you get that big, I'm like, oh, that could be fun because it's gonna glide really like
yeah.
efficiently and
I
fall way different.
I j- I just finished 21st at Lake Eufaula in Oklahoma, and I caught most of my weighing fish on a 3/0 core tackle hover rig with a Maxent uh why you I'm drawing
Creature
a
hug.
blank. The creature hog, thank you.
Yeah,
In black and blue or the South African special.
yeah, I
Uh
love that color's good. I love the South African
yeah,
special one.
yeah. But it works. So I mean, that was kind of why we came out with a 3/0 hook, which is, probably way bigger than anything else I've seen. But it was simply because I wanted to pitch it around because, you know, the traditional hover strolling is all about that fall. You get that kind of a tube type fall. But what I've come to realize is when you're flipping like a beaver style creature bait, you still get really good gliding motion, but the coolest part a lot of times is when you pick up on the bait after it hits the bottom. So instead, if you threw this, say, on a Texas rig, it would come pretty much right back at me as I pulled it. But because you've got a 90-degree in it, that bait, when you pull up on it, the bait actually darts
Hmm.
from side to side on the bottom. So you get that quick, erratic scattering motion, kind of like you'd get with a crayfish that's trying to burst away. And it's just a really good way at generating that reaction strike. And and Lake Eufaula, I was fishing around a lot of bedding fish, and I think it was something that triggered those bedding fish into biting.
Yeah, and were you throwing it in dirty water as well on Eufaula? Because I saw some
Yeah.
videos of it where like people were running and be like that cleanish green Oklahoma water, and all of a sudden it'd be like mud, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh geez,
Yeah, I did. I caught a lot of fish in water that can't get much muddier. Let's
yeah.
put it that way. I mean, it
So
was in most places I'd be looking at it going, "No way am I fishing that." But in Oklahoma, the fish live in that pretty much year round in a lot of places.
it's crazy. So not only is hover strolling a finesse technique, but it sounds like you with core tackle are allowing it to expand its horizons and become in every condition type technique.
Yeah, that's a big part of our plan. We Yeah, we've got a couple prototypes that we're just getting ready to put into production that are gonna be considered, one is gonna be a flipping hover rig, so it's gonna be a stouter hook, a size 4/0, a little heavier weight, a 3/16 ounce size, basically what you just rattled off. We've got another one that we're making for deeper ledge fishing, so
Oh,
we've got
that'll
a
be
bunch
nice.
in the works. Uh, it's just been something that I've had these now since well, last spring, the prototype since probably June or July. And there's a lot more to this technique than just the traditional kind of what came over from Japan of just the super finesse. There really is going to be more to it. And, whether it's a fad or not, we'll see. But I really think that the feedback we're getting has been incredible. And I feel pretty comfortable that the people are catching a lot of fish on it that'll make it stick around for a while.
So let's kind of dive into like baits that you have found so far to work on it. Like on your page, I know we have already mentioned a 4 1/4 flatworm. We've mentioned creature hog max scent. So they're both max scent baits, but kind of like broaden our horizons here and
Yep.
talk about some other baits that you found work relatively well or exceptionally well on the
Yeah.
hover trolling technique.
Well, one that is something everybody has is just your soft stick baits, whether it's a Senko or a General, whatever. I mean, whatever soft stick bait it is, every company's got one. Uh, it's really been a pretty cool bait because you almost get a mixture of like a fluke with like a Texas rigged soft stick bait. So you still get the wobble because it falls more perpendicular in the water or
So
parallel in the water column. So you still get that kind of shimmy, but it's kind of shimmying on the glide. So it's a different presentation with it. And it's something that I never really even thought about using much until we started getting a lot of feedback from people that they were really doing well fishing soft stick baits. So that
are
was
they
one.
like a 3 inch, a 4 inch, a five, or all of them?
The specifically the 5 inch is what most of the feedback's on. I've had good luck now using it on the 5 inch, but the 4 inch works as well with the smaller 3/64 ounce sizes. So those are good. Um, I mean the a couple that I've really fallen in love with lately is the live tricks. So Bass Tricks has a couple
Yeah.
the live tricks. These are both baits that give you very good gliding motion versus like they don't impart a ton of action. There's not a lot built into them, but they're so lifelike and natural looking that they do a really good job on the fall. A lot of the Z-Man products too, we're finding are working really well because they're so buoyant that you get a lot of gliding motion out of them. So like the palmetto bug, which is a creature style bait again, or kind of a beaver style bait, is a good one. Uh, I mean, I'm gonna tell you. I mean, it seems like most baits work well. The ones that don't work as well are the ones that have big flappers. Because what happens with those flappers is they once they start moving, they create a lot of drag, and therefore they're trying to hold the bait in place versus letting the bait go on its own. So, like a Zoom speed craw or like a Berkeley chigger craw, they still work on them, but you're not going to get kind of that separation between, say, like a Texas rig and like a hover strolling technique.
So if you wanted to go to like a chunk craw crossover style bait, maybe like a D bomb would be better on the
Yeah.
creature bait side as opposed to something with flappers on it.
Yeah, D-bomb would be a really good one. The Beaver's a really good one. Zoom has the was it the Z-Hog?
Hmm.
That's a decent one. So you just don't want something that's got too much vibration because that'll really put the brakes on the gliding motion.
Got it. So, man, it sounds
Flukes
like
flukes are great. Like flukes, any of yours like fluke style imitating baits have been really
so like
good
a
too.
baby Z2 maybe or the regular Z2,
Yep.
caffeine shad, everything like that.
Yeah, the Kitech,
Was it the live impact? The
a
or
little
shad
4 inch.
impact? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a killer. But yeah, the flukes, man, like when we went to Clark's Hill earlier this year, which has a lot of spotted bass in it, my roommates and I were all throwing it, and it was unbelievable how many spotted bass we were catching. The problem is on that lake, the spotted bass just generally run much smaller than the largemouth and can't compete. But we were all throwing some form of like fluke or shad type imitating bait, and it was working wonders.
Wow, that sounds like fun. I'm really interested to see. Have you played around with smallmouth with it? How do they react?
Well, without giving out too much, the Sturgeon Bay Open's coming up soon,
Okay,
and
we'll keep. That's fine. I
no,
appreciate.
I did a lot of my field testing on Great Lakes smallmouth as well as clear natural lakes smallmouth of Wisconsin, and I found it to be quite good.
And if you want to fish it in like 40 foot of water, be prepared to count to like 90 for it
Yeah,
to get down. So,
yeah, it'll
oh
take a while.
yes. So, kind of like real quick, dive into your setup to throw the hover rig. So, like rod, reel, line. I'm assuming it's a super light rod, really light braid, or even just straight fluorocarbon. So, do you mind talking
Yeah.
about that real quick?
Yeah, so with the smaller sizes, so like the 3/64 ounce sizes, I'm going to be throwing that on spinning gear. So I make all my own rods. I use MHX blanks. The one that I really like is the NSJ 871. So it's a 7 foot 3 one power. So a medium light, fast action rod, like a great all around finesse rod that I would pair up with a 10-pound braided mainline. And generally, then I'm going to have either a 6, 8, or 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. And that just kind of depends on water clarity that I'm fishing. Uh, and then, a good spinning reel with a good drag system is what you need on the back. And then from a heavier setup, so like with the 3/0 with that creature hog, I was flipping that on a 7.3 medium heavy fast action rod, and then I had it on 15-pound straight fluorocarbon line.
So the setup versatility is quite vast.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, it comes down to the angler. If the angler wants to apply this technique to shallow power water or shallow power fishing, they definitely can do that. And you can set it up on the same sort of traditional tackle you'd be flipping a Texas rig with.
got it. That is fun. So, I hate to put you on the spot here, but do you have the cover rig jig by Core Tackle, like the hover rig jig Core Tackle out laying around? And do you mind real fast, like just rigging a bait for our viewers before I hit you with the
Yeah.
last question, just so everybody
Yeah.
can see how you actually rig it up?
So this is the 3/64 ounce size. And then let me unrig one.
I should have asked you that before we got online, and I was like, "Oh, we
So
should do this."
Yeah, I mean, it's no big deal. This is the 4 1/4 inch max scent flatworm, which is known as a smallmouth bait for drop shots, but I've been crushing largemouth and smallmouth on it. But when you rig these, and this is, whether you're rigging the core tackle hover rig hook, which is what I have here, or you go out and buy one of the other 90-degree unweighted hover strolling hooks, you want to rig it 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch behind the head. So most baits would go in right through the top of the plastic like that. You don't want to do that. You want to start it back. So I've got this, I don't know, probably a 1/4 inch behind the head.
Yep.
And then at that point, you're just going to thread it on like you would thread a normal bait up a hook shank. And with the hover rig, you want to thread it on until it's right at about where the lead starts, and then you just come through, and you're gonna slide the bait all the way up to either where the weed guard is, or if you cut the weed guard off, because I cut them off, I'd say 2/3 of the time. You slide it up to the weed guard or where the hook eye is. Hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
And then the easiest thing for me is I just take my index finger and put it on the eye of the hook. And then this is kind of hard to do with the camera. I grab the tip of the worm and then I just kind of pull that up and push the eye into the cone of the hook. So what happens there is you've got the cone actually locks the bait into place, so it really doesn't move on the bait at all. But now you've got your weight fully running from the tip of the bait all the way down the hook shank, so you're going to achieve that same gliding motion and falling motion. But you can fish with this pretty much all day and maybe not have to change worms even once, versus if you do it with the traditional stuff, you're probably putting a new weight in or putting a new bait on for each fish.
I'm gonna have to pick some up. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So,
I'll hook you up. I'll hook you up.
oh, you don't have to do that, but I appreciate it. Everything here. Now, one thing before I do hate with the last question, I apologize on this again, but how imperative is it to make sure your bait is rigged straight on the hook?
Hmm. So I would have said right off the bat that it was an extremely important thing to do. But you can also obtain a different fall based on how the bait is rigged. So if it's a little bit off center, it actually can lead the bait to doing some crazier things on the fall. I will add though that if it's not straight, you generally will get more twisting motion out of the bait, so it may lead to some more line twist. But I would say an angler should actually experiment a little bit with it, because depending on what bait it is, having a little kink in it may actually give it a fall that you would prefer.
Good, good
But
advice.
generally speaking, I would say try to rig it straight, at least to start with.
Awesome. So thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Like I said, it'd take about a half hour, and I think the technique itself is relatively straightforward. The most important action of the bait is on the fall. Now, I keep coming up with questions here as I'm trying to get to the last question, but when you're bringing it in, like, because my mind is just going crazy, do you want it on the bottom, like, or is it all based on what bait it is? Like, some you want suspended and you kind of hover it through, and then some you can kind of drag and make it dart, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Like, it just depends.
Yeah, it really depends. I think originally it was more of a suspended fish pattern, because one of the cool things with it, because it's such a light weight and the way the bait glides, you on suspending fish, you can almost like get the bait to float. So if you pop the rod, you can almost get the bait to glide without falling. And that's what we see a lot of the anglers doing recently, because you're talking about such light weights. So it's a great way to fish for suspended fish. But I also, I think so the fall is half of it. For me, the other part of it though is when you pop it off the bottom, you get
Yeah.
such a good darting motion side to side that if you're dealing with fish that are on the bottom of the lake, that really agitates them. Like it's a natural movement for their prey, but for us with our baits, it's an unnatural movement, meaning like we're not normally able to get that same sort of darting action out of our baits. So it's something that I found is a great triggering motion for them. And, a lot of it kind of comes down to the bait presentation. So if you want to put a cross style bait on and fish it through rocks, you absolutely can do that.
Mm. And I would assume because it glides relatively well that it doesn't get hung up that easily as well.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about it because your weight is inside of the bait and transferred throughout the bait. You don't have that heavy jig head, profile that wants to pull you down in the rocks. In order to get these stuck, you pretty much got to either get the line stuck between rocks or actually get the bait to glide into a crack in the rocks. Um, but it's a great thing. I mean, like on the Great Lakes for fishing, around gobies and things that are scattering around the bottom, it really does a good job at triggering those fish. Similar to like how a tube kind of darts when you pick up on it. It's a cool technique, and it is one that I really feel like is limitless in terms of how you present it and what baits you use with it.
It's a nice word to hear in the fishing industry because I feel like so many techniques are actually limited to their
Yeah.
capabilities and what they can do. So it's I look forward to experimenting and trying it out. And I want to say thank you for coming on, but I do have one last question for you, finally getting to it. So, but the do it molds juice of the show, it's a question that all of our viewers are used to here at this point. And it's a place where you can customize your tackle. And I think it's kind of cool because with core tackle, you guys have literally customized your own rigging jig head for this technique. And the question is, what was the thought process behind the creation of the core tackle, like rig jig creation?
Yeah. So, uh, I mean, the thought process was I was sick of losing nail weights and baits, and I was like, why can't I? I was like, there's got to be a way to kind of connect the two. So what I actually started doing was I was hand threading on nail weights onto the jig hook, and then and I figured out real quick that I could thread that onto the worm the way I just did it. And I basically went to Johnny Schultz, who's a good buddy of mine, and I was like, man, I've been catching them really good on this. And when he saw it, and I was walking him through the process, he's like, why don't we actually try to mold this? And that's what led us down the path of a couple of different prototypes. But I mean, basically, it's basically a nail weight on a head or
Mhm.
on a hook. So it's not anything crazy. I think the cool part is more of the idea of how it rigs and it transfers the weight through the body. So it's something that, as a tackle tinkerer and somebody who has stacks of do it molds, over here and lead melting pots in my garage, it was a kind of a fun challenge to take on, and one that I love doing stuff like that. So yeah, that was the thought process behind it. But it was basically I love the technique and thought there was a better way to come up with the rigging of it.
Yeah, I think you hit the spot on the head. And from what it sounds like, the perceived notion of it is that it's a hit so far with everybody who wants to do it. So, um,
Yeah.
congrats to you guys being able to put the foot forward and create something that is completely unique. And I hope it's not just what was the word we were using a little bit ago? Just
Fad.
like a fad in the fishing
Yeah.
industry. Sometimes techniques are, and then some stick around. And let's hope this is one that sticks around for you guys because finesse presentations, it seems like the bass will always eat them. So
Yeah, it's one where, for personal use purposes, I think I'd be alright with it being a fad because then I'd be the only one doing it. But the feedback on it has been overwhelming and supportive in terms of, the people going out catching fish and having really good days of fishing with it. So I feel like it's probably gonna be here for a while, and, I'm just happy to have, kinda helped bring hover strolling, I guess, to more of the forefront. But I will tell you this, like, I never once we decided to come to market with it, the last thing I ever thought of would be the stress involved with marketing a product. Like, I was so comfortable with how it performed, but as soon as you start selling it to the general public, you're like, are they, like, I wanna make sure people catch fish with it and not, not feel like I'm just trying to market something different and gimmicky, and, so there was a lot of stress with respect to it, but having the feedback that we've gotten has been, just fantastic.
Yeah. Positive perception is a great thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Matt, I want to say thank you for taking the half hour here to join us on the lab. It was really fun learning about hover strolling, and I really look forward to applying it into my tackle arsenal. And hopefully, I like it so much that I can have guide clients using it and catching a bunch of smallmouth and largemouth. So, whatever makes my job easier as a guide, as you know, as
Yep.
guiding as well, it's a beneficial thing to everyone. So, yeah,
Absolutely. Do nothing, easy techniques are the goal of all guide fishermen
yeah,
out there, so I wish you nothing but the luck, and thank you very much for having me on the Lure
yeah,
Lab. Andrew, it's been a
yeah,
blast, and, we'll get you some core tackle hover
yeah.
rigs.
And we'll chat soon. And safe travels to the Ozarks, and go
Thank you.
catch them up.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
All right, Matt. We'll talk soon. Thank you again.
Yep.
Bye bye now. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here to the Lure Lab, where we discussed hover strolling. Um, awesome technique, hot technique that came over from Japan about a year ago. And I'm glad I was corrected on, because I just recently found out about it like 3 to 6 months ago, and just started doing a lot more digging into it and trying to understand it and how I can apply it. So, this episode, I hope, was beneficial not only to everyone tuning in, but I know it's going to be beneficial to myself as well. And that is the point of the Lure Lab here, is to try and bring on guys like Matt, who are tackle tinkers and always trying to get the most out of every technique that we can throw at the bass on a daily basis. But if you're tuned in here on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment down below if you've used the hover strolling technique. If you're on MP3 like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a review. Helps podcasts be seen to more bass heads like us here tuning in weekly. Um, and then, as always, we'll see everyone next week.